I had told you we were going to have some listener questions, and we will, but there's one more topic that I want to cover, which is a recent open letter that was co-signed by some 200 people in the French newspaper Le Monde. And the vast majority of them, I think, looking through the list, were different kinds of celebrities, so people in the arts. And so I decided to respond to this on Twitter, and I want to share a little bit about why I responded and also what I said. So, the overall idea of the letter was that we need a radical transformation post-COVID-19. So here, first I'll read you the letter, which is pretty brief, and then I'll give you my specific comments on it. And I'll read it pretty quickly, and then I'm going to highlight the things that I think are most important afterward. The COVID-19 pandemic is a tragedy. The crisis is, however, inviting us to examine what is essential. And what we see as simple adjustments are not enough. The problem is systemic. The ongoing ecological catastrophe is a meta-crisis. The massive extinction of life on Earth is no longer in doubt, and all indicators point to a direct existential threat. Unlike a pandemic, however severe, a global ecological collapse will have immeasurable consequences. We therefore solemnly call upon leaders and all of us as citizens to leave behind the unsustainable logic that still prevails and to undertake a profound overhaul of our goals, values, and economies. The pursuit of consumerism and an obsession with productivity have led us to deny the value of life itself, that of plants, that of animals, and that of a great number of human beings. Pollution, climate change, and the destruction of our remaining natural zones has brought the world to a breaking point. For these reasons, along with the urgency of renewing with a politics of social equity, we believe it is unthinkable to go back to normal. The radical transformation we need at all levels demands boldness and courage. It will not take place without a massive and determined commitment. We must act now. It is as much a matter of survival as of dignity and coherence. So now, here's what I focused on in my responses. And by the way, before I get into that, just one reason why I'm responding to a celebrity letter. There were a bunch of academics who signed on to it, but celebrity letters are often very good at capturing a prevailing narrative. And it's particularly true if it's a moral narrative, a narrative about right and wrong. So narrative means a story about the choices we face going forward. And when celebrities get together to do this, it usually means that there's a narrative that's very established in the culture. And in this case, it's established, but I think it's a very wrong narrative. The overall narrative being that we have destroyed our planet and we need, mostly because we've had political freedom. And so we need a radical reduction of political freedom to save our planet. So here's what I chose to focus on. So this is my first tweet. I did four tweets / Twitter threads, so combinations of tweets. A letter from Madonna and Jane Fonda I focus on just because those are two of the most famous people and they both have Twitter handles. Robert De Niro was also one, unfortunately. A lot of good actors I like. Juliette Binoche, I think, was one of the leaders, and she was in the fantastic movie Chocolat. So it's always sad to see really talented people, for the most part, saying things that are, I think, really destructive. And often I don't think they know, but in part because there's an unchallenged moral narrative, they feel as idealists like, well, there's no negative in getting on board with something like this. Whereas I think what they're on board with, knowingly or not, is incredibly destructive. So my first tweet, a letter from Madonna, Jane Fonda, and other celebs, just for brevity, because you only have so many characters, says it's, quote, unthinkable to, quote, go back to normal, unquote, unquote, and condemns our, quote, obsession with productivity, unquote. And then I write, in 1980, 42% of humans lived on less than $2 a day. Thanks to the normal, i.e. free world's, quote, obsession with productivity, it's now 10%. So just to elaborate on this a little bit, I found it very, very revealing that obsession with productivity was under attack, because obsession with productivity, that can have negative senses, in the sense of, you could think of an individual as they're so obsessed with productivity, but they're doing it at the expense of their overall happiness, their what you could call their flourishing, their families. You could think of these situations. But overall, the problem historically is that we're not nearly productive enough. Nature doesn't give us ample free nourishment, and nature does give us a lot of threats. So as human beings, what we have to be really good at is producing values we need to flourish, to nourish us and to protect us from nature, as well as to fulfill us, things like leisure activities. And up until very recently, historically, we were very unproductive. And even, as I said, in 1980, the year I was born, 42% of people lived on less than $2 a day. That means the average person was super unproductive. And now it's less than 10%. And that's an incredible thing. So when people talk about, oh, normal is bad, what they mean is, what they mean, whether they know it or not, is that our level of productivity is bad, and the progress in our level of productivity, which is still ongoing. And I think it's paused or even regressed a little bit in the current crisis, but in general, it's been ongoing. They're saying that's not, the level and the progress are both bad. They'd call it unsustainable. And I think this poverty statistic puts into perspective why it's good and it's progressive. It's part of an improvement of the world. And if you want more on the idea of being progressive and how we can create more and more resources out of the virtually unlimited raw matter and energy in nature, see my podcast last week on the 5 things Planet of the Humans gets totally wrong, where I talked about this sustainability idea a lot. Next one. The pursuit of consumerism must stop, Madonna, Jane Fonda, and other celebrities tell us. But without consumerism, productive people enjoying free time and abundant resources, a modern arts/entertainment industry, celebrities' jobs, wouldn't exist. So in this one, I'm defending the idea of consumerism, or the pursuit of consumerism. Now, as with productivity, and maybe even more so with productivity, there's a sense in which people can sort of consume in an irrational way. Certainly people can consume in a way that doesn't give them fulfillment. But what I try to get at in this tweet is, what is the heart of consumerism? It's really that you're productive enough so that you have produced free time and you've produced abundant resources that you can utilize during that time. And so you could think of, well, the pursuit of consumerism, that's like, well, you have time and ability to go somewhere like the Grand Canyon and enjoy that. If you're thinking of things like enjoying nature, you think of you've produced the time and ability to spend quality time with your family, or even you think, well, we've produced the ability to deal with serious diseases, which in part, which that can free up decades of your life if it was a disease that could kill you. So there's just this tendency to take an aspect or a misuse of something like consumption and then to use it to damn the whole thing. And that's why I think it's really important to talk about what is the core of this and why that's a good thing. And yeah, if people are consuming in a way that's irrational, that just means you should encourage them to consume more rationally, but you shouldn't discourage them from producing and from consuming. That's a really anti-human, anti-happiness perspective. The next one. So this is the second to last. I agree with Madonna, Jane Fonda, and other celebrities that today's crisis is, quote, inviting us to examine what is essential, unquote. The most essential value it should highlight is freedom. Their letter does not mention freedom once and consists mostly of veiled calls to abolish freedom. And then I continue in the thread. Expressions like radical transformation, massive and determined commitment, profound overhaul of our goals, values, and economies can only mean forcibly preventing individuals around the globe from their chosen pursuit of consumerism, in quotes, and obsession with productivity, in quotes. Whenever people are calling for radical transformation, there's always the question of, how is that going to come about? Are they really just giving you reasons as an individual, like saying, well, you should buy an Apple computer instead of a Microsoft computer? Is that what they're doing? Or are they really calling for force? And here it's clearly calling for force, because they know that left free human beings are going to focus on being productive. and they are going to focus on being consumers. Now, you can, as I said before, you can try to give people rational guidance about that, but that's totally different than saying it's fundamentally wrong and thus we need to force you to do something else. And the reason that I highlighted freedom is that if you look at the response to this coronavirus, so much of what has happened is there's a response that places zero value on human freedom. That's not to say there shouldn't be a response, and even the government should have a role. But I think the government should think of itself as our goal is to protect people's freedom. So one role I've talked about it has in infectious disease is when people are demonstrably dangerous, as in they're carrying it, they're contagious, particularly if they could, they're a super spreader or something like that. There's a role for government in having those people isolate in one form or another, as long as they're actually a demonstrable danger to others. But when it's doing that, it's saying we value freedom. This person is interfering with other people's freedom temporarily by being a demonstrable danger, so they have to isolate. But it's saying our goal is to protect freedom. And what we're seeing today is that the whole response has placed zero value on freedom and given the government basically unlimited power as long as it says it's, quote, saving our lives. And I think you can see just the mass destruction that's occurring in every aspect of people's lives. And as I argued on last week's show with Daniel Gorbatenko, even in our ability to protect ourselves from this disease, the government lockdowns have made it harder for us by forcing us inside, which exposes us to higher doses rather, if we're around infectious people, and then it encourages us to go in poorly ventilated areas usually and mix with people if it's a, quote, essential, like a grocery store, and then to come back and then be inside with other people. And on top of that, to stay inside all the time and really, more or less encouraging us to eat junk food in terms of just focusing so much on takeout. And so just increased doses, lowered immunity, and broadly just encouraging us not to think about how to deal with this rationally. So freedom should be the value people are so focused on right now. And these guys are not focused on it at all. And their whole focus is we need to restrict freedom much more. They're seeing the response and they're saying, yeah, people aren't producing and consuming as much. That's great. But how do we impose a much greater restriction on freedom long term? Final thread, maybe the most revealing sentence from the celebrity open letter on COVID-19. Unlike a pandemic, however severe, a global ecological collapse will have immeasurable consequences. So my response to that is, so you wouldn't consider it immeasurable consequences if billions of humans died? By what standard? Whether these celebrities know it or not, their standard of evaluating Earth is not human flourishing, it's unchanged nature. They don't want an Earth that's as human-friendly as possible. They want an Earth that's as human-free as possible. And I think that is really, it's just such an important issue. How are you evaluating the Earth? And just the idea that you can say a pandemic, however severe, and you don't consider that to have immeasurable consequence, like what could be worse than an Earth that's uninhabitable for humans? Obviously, you're not valuing the humans on the Earth. You're really saying the humans are an obstacle to the Earth as you see it, which is really focused on the non-human. So it's such an anti-human perspective. Now, their rationalization is usually, well, look, we depend on everything else, and it's a fragile planet and a delicate nurture. But it's so revealing that they say, yeah, if we wouldn't consider it that bad in effect, if there were almost an infinite pandemic, what's really bad is changing the rest of nature. And that shows the rest of nature is the priority, not its impact on human beings. And it's partially why they're so indifferent to the fact that in general, we've changed the rest of nature in a way that's really good for human beings.
Power Hour. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of energy. Power Hour. The antidote to shallow thinking about energy issues.